The television courtroom had never witnessed such a moment of pure, unfiltered disrespect from someone so young. 12-year-old Tyler Mason walked into Judge Judy's courtroom with his AirPods Max firmly planted on his ears, his latest iPhone glowing in his hands, and an expression of boredom that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else on planet Earth. His designer sneakers, worth more than some people's monthly car payments, squeaked against the polished floor as he slouched toward the defendant's table without so much as a glance at the elderly woman whose life he had deliberately destroyed for TikTok views. What happened in the next 8 minutes would become the most viral courtroom moment in television history, shared over 80 million times across every social media platform imaginable, with Judge Judy's response becoming a rallying cry for parents, teachers, and anyone who believed that consequences still mattered in a world where children seemed increasingly untouchable. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Tyler didn't just get a lecture. He didn't just lose the case. What Judge Judy did to this entitled 12-year-old was so devastatingly precise, so righteously furious, and so perfectly calibrated to hit him exactly where it hurt most that it silenced not just Tyler, not just his enabling mother, but the entire courtroom and eventually millions of viewers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The words that came out of Tyler's mouth, the disrespect he showed to a decorated judge with 35 years of experience, triggered a response that would be studied in parenting classes, shared in teachers' lounges, and referenced in therapy sessions for years to come. Judge Judy didn't just rule against him. She delivered a masterclass in accountability that would actually change this kid's entire life trajectory. Before we show you the exact moment when Tyler called Judge Judy a Karen to her face and told her she had boomer energy, you need to understand who these people really were and what brought them to this explosive confrontation. Because this wasn't just about one disrespectful comment or one destroyed garden. This was about a pattern of behavior that had been escalating for years, enabled by a mother who was too afraid to be a parent, and directed at vulnerable people who represented everything wrong with how Tyler had been allowed to move through the world without ever facing real consequences. Hit that like button right now if you believe kids need to learn respect and that parents need to actually parent instead of trying to be their child's best friend. Subscribe because what Judge Judy reveals about Tyler's pattern of behavior will absolutely shock you, and trust me, the next 20 minutes will restore your faith that karma is not only real but sometimes it wears a judge's robe and has zero patience for entitled behavior. Tyler Mason was the perfect storm of modern parenting failures. At 12 years old, he had a TikTok account with 50,000 followers built entirely on content that mocked adults, disrespected authority figures, and celebrated getting away with behavior that would have gotten previous generations grounded for months. His single mother, Jennifer Mason, had spent the 3 years since her divorce trying desperately to be the cool parent, the understanding parent, the parent who treated her son like a friend instead of a child who needed boundaries, discipline, and consequences. She worked as a marketing coordinator and made decent money, which she spent liberally on Tyler, buying him every new gadget, every expensive pair of sneakers, every item he demanded because saying no felt too much like conflict and conflict felt too much like the failed marriage she was still processing. Tyler's world was one of zero accountability. When he talked back to teachers, Jennifer defended him and blamed the school system. When he was suspended 4 times in 2 years, she complained about how schools didn't understand creative kids. When neighbors complained about his behavior, she wrote them off as overly sensitive and told Tyler to ignore the haters, using the same language he used about his TikTok comments. She had already paid out $6,700 to 3 different neighbors over the past 18 months to make problems disappear, to avoid Tyler facing any legal consequences, to maintain the illusion that her parenting approach was working. It wasn't working. Tyler was becoming more entitled, more aggressive, and more convinced that his social media followers made him important, that adults were obstacles to be mocked, and that consequences were things that happened to other people. The person who would finally change everything was 72-year-old Eleanor Rodriguez, a retired teacher who lived next door to the Masons and had spent 30 years cultivating a garden that was her pride, joy, and living memorial to her late husband. Eleanor Rodriguez represented everything beautiful about patience, dedication, and love that transcends death. Her garden wasn't just a collection of plants. It was a living museum of her 40-year marriage to Eduardo Rodriguez, who had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. Eduardo had planted the first rose bushes the week they moved into their modest home in 1983, working in the soil with his bare hands because they couldn't afford proper gardening tools yet. Over 4 decades, that garden had grown into something extraordinary. Rare varieties that Eduardo had cultivated from cuttings, roses that bloomed in colors most people had never seen, specimens that professional horticulturists had offered to purchase for thousands of dollars. Eleanor always refused to sell. These weren't just flowers. They were Eduardo's legacy, her daily connection to the man she had loved since she was 17 years old, her reason to get out of bed every morning and tend to something that needed her care. Mrs. Rodriguez lived on a fixed income from Eduardo's pension and her modest teacher's retirement. Every penny was budgeted carefully. She drove a 19-year-old Honda Civic that Eduardo had maintained meticulously before his illness. She clipped coupons and shopped sales and wore dresses she'd owned for 20 years because they still fit and still looked respectable. But her garden received whatever investment it needed. Special soil amendments, organic fertilizers, careful watering systems that Eduardo had installed before he got too sick to work outside. She spent 3 hours every morning in that garden, talking to Eduardo as she pruned and watered and fertilized, telling him about her day, asking his advice on problems she faced, maintaining their conversation even though only she could speak now. Neighbors knew not to bother Mrs. Rodriguez before 10 in the morning. Those were her hours with Eduardo, sacred and inviolable. Tyler Mason had moved in next door a year ago when his mother purchased the house during the divorce proceedings. At first, the disruption was minor. Loud music occasionally, typical kid noise, nothing that bothered Mrs. Rodriguez significantly. She had been a middle school teacher for 30 years. She understood that children had energy and made noise. But Tyler's behavior had escalated systematically over the months, each incident worse than the last, each boundary crossed more egregiously. It started with deliberately bouncing basketballs against the shared fence during her morning garden time, disrupting her peaceful hours with Eduardo. When she politely asked him to play in the afternoon instead, he laughed and did it more frequently. Then came the trash, handfuls of garbage thrown over the fence into her garden beds, requiring her to spend hours picking through her plants to remove the contamination. The situation had deteriorated into something genuinely cruel when Tyler discovered that Mrs. Rodriguez spoke with a slight accent, her first language being Spanish though she'd lived in America for 52 years and spoke English perfectly. He began filming her without permission, mocking her pronunciation, making exaggerated accents in videos he posted to TikTok with captions like, "My crazy neighbor," and, "Why are old people so weird?" Mrs. Rodriguez, who had taught English as a second language for 15 years and helped hundreds of immigrant children succeed in American schools, found herself being mocked for the very accent she had worked decades to minimize. She tried speaking to Jennifer Mason about Tyler's behavior. Jennifer apologized vaguely, promised to talk to him, and did nothing. The videos continued. The harassment escalated. Then came the morning that changed everything. Mrs. Rodriguez woke up at 6:30 as always, made her coffee, and walked outside to begin her morning routine with Eduardo. What she found destroyed something inside her that had survived even her husband's death. Her roses, her beautiful irreplaceable roses, were dead. Not naturally dead, not diseased or failing, but chemically murdered. Someone had systematically poured industrial-strength weed killer on every single rose bush in her garden. 40 years of cultivation, Eduardo's living legacy, decades of careful nurturing and love, reduced to blackened stems and withered petals. The damage was catastrophic and deliberate. Someone had taken time to ensure every plant received a lethal dose. Mrs. Rodriguez collapsed on her knees in the garden, surrounded by Eduardo's dying roses, and wept in a way she hadn't wept since the morning he passed away in their bedroom 3 years earlier. She might never have known who did it except Tyler made a critical mistake born from the same arrogance that had defined all his behavior. He filmed himself doing it. Posted the video to TikTok with the caption, "Pranking my annoying neighbor, old people are so easy to troll," followed by laughing emojis. The video showed him climbing the fence at night, systematically poisoning every rose bush while narrating his actions like a nature documentary, laughing about how Mrs. Rodriguez would cry when she found her stupid flowers dead. 50,000 followers saw it. Hundreds commented with laughing emojis and fire emojis and praised him for the epic prank. 3 people who knew Mrs. Rodriguez sent her screenshots, unable to believe what they were seeing. Mrs. Rodriguez did something she had never done in 72 years of life. She filed a lawsuit. Eduardo had always handled conflict through conversation, through reason, through finding common ground with people. She had inherited that philosophy and lived by it through decades of teaching challenging students, dealing with difficult parents, navigating the complexities of public education. But this wasn't something conversation could fix. Tyler had committed a crime, filmed himself doing it, and faced 0 consequences from his mother. The police report she filed led to juvenile probation officers getting involved, but the real accountability would come from small claims court where she sued for $2,400 to replace her destroyed roses and $800 for the emotional distress of losing something irreplaceable. She had consulted with 3 different horticulturists who confirmed that roses of that age and rarity couldn't truly be replaced, that 40-year-old root systems produced blooms that new plants simply couldn't match, that she was actually undervaluing her loss significantly. What Mrs. Rodriguez didn't know was that Judge Judy Scheindlin's research team had gone far deeper than the surface facts of this case. When Tyler Mason's name crossed Judge Judy's desk, something triggered her instincts honed from 25 years as a family court judge in Manhattan handling over 20,000 cases. She assigned her team to dig into every aspect of Tyler's background, and what they uncovered painted a disturbing picture of escalating behavior that had been enabled and hidden by a mother too afraid to be a parent. They found the 3 previous incidents with other neighbors that Jennifer had paid to make disappear. They found school records showing suspensions, psychological evaluations recommending intervention, teachers' notes describing increasingly aggressive behavior. They found Tyler's complete social media history, including videos he thought he deleted that showed a pattern of targeting vulnerable people for content. Judge Judy had spent 3 nights reviewing evidence, and she walked into that courtroom with something she rarely felt anymore after decades of seeing human behavior at its worst. She was genuinely angry. The courtroom buzzed with its usual energy as cameras captured what everyone assumed would be another routine small claims dispute. The audience had settled into their seats, mostly retirees who had watched Judge Judy religiously for years and appreciated seeing entitled people get what they deserved. Production assistants made their final checks while the bailiff took his position near the bench. Nobody in that room realized they were about to witness something that would be studied in parenting classes and shared by millions as the perfect example of what happens when consequences finally catch up with someone who thought they were untouchable. Mrs. Rodriguez entered first, moving slowly with the careful steps of someone whose knees hurt from decades of kneeling in garden soil. She wore her Sunday best, a modest floral dress she'd purchased from JCPenney 15 years ago that she still took care of meticulously because quality clothing lasted if you treated it right. Her daughter accompanied her for moral support, carrying the folder of evidence that included photographs of the garden before and after, printouts of Tyler's TikTok video, statements from the horticulturists, and pictures of Eduardo planting those first roses back in 1983. Then Tyler and Jennifer Mason made their entrance, and the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted immediately. Tyler walked in like he was entering a shopping mall, AirPods Max covering his ears, phone held at eye level as he scrolled through what was probably TikTok, completely oblivious to the solemnity of the courtroom or the gravity of why he was there. He didn't acknowledge the bailiff's presence, didn't glance at Mrs. Rodriguez sitting 20 feet away, didn't register that he was in a place where respect and decorum actually mattered. Jennifer Mason followed behind him, dressed in a professional blazer and slacks, her face showing the nervous tension of someone who knew this situation was serious but had no idea how to control her son anymore. She kept reaching out to touch Tyler's shoulder, trying to get him to put the phone away, trying to make him sit up straight, trying to project some semblance of parental authority. Tyler shrugged off every attempt, his body language screaming that he had no respect for his mother, no concern about the proceedings, and no awareness that he was about to face someone who had spent 35 years destroying people exactly like him. Judge Judy watched this entrance with the calm, patient expression of a predator studying prey, taking in every detail of Tyler's body language, every dismissive gesture, every sign of the entitlement that had brought him to her courtroom. She had seen thousands of defendants walk through those doors, but something about this 12-year-old triggered every instinct she had developed over decades of identifying people who needed to learn hard lessons. The bailiff called the court to order and Judge Judy leaned forward slightly in her chair, that slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth that experienced viewers recognized as the calm before a devastating storm. She had already made her assessment in the first 30 seconds of observation, and now she was ready to systematically dismantle the facade of this entitled child who thought his social media followers made him important. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her signature razor-sharp focus, her voice cutting through the courtroom atmosphere like a scalpel through tissue. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you're suing Tyler Mason for $3,200 in damages to your property. Tell me what happened." Her tone was professional but carried an undercurrent that suggested she already knew far more about this case than the basic facts suggested. Mrs. Rodriguez began her testimony with visible emotion, her voice cracking as she described the garden that Eduardo had planted 4 decades ago, explaining how those roses represented their entire married life together, how she spent every morning talking to her late husband while tending the plants he had loved. She showed the photographs, the before images revealing a garden of breathtaking beauty, rare blooms and colors that seemed almost unnatural in their vibrancy, the after images showing blackened stems and withered petals, systematic destruction that could only have been deliberate. Then she played Tyler's TikTok video on the courtroom screen, and the audience gasped audibly as they watched a 12-year-old child narrate his deliberate destruction of an elderly woman's most precious possession while laughing about how she would cry when she discovered what he'd done. Throughout Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony, Tyler sat slouched in his chair with one AirPod still in his ear, his phone resting on his lap just below the table where he thought Judge Judy couldn't see it. His face showed absolutely no remorse, no empathy, no recognition that he had caused real harm to another human being. He rolled his eyes when Mrs. Rodriguez's voice broke with emotion. He sighed loudly when she described how Eduardo had planted each rose bush by hand. He muttered something under his breath that the microphones barely caught but sounded distinctly like "so dramatic" when she explained that some of these plants could never be replaced. Jennifer Mason kept elbowing him, whispering frantically for him to sit up straight, to look respectful, to please just behave for 20 minutes. Tyler ignored every attempt at parental correction, his body language broadcasting to everyone in the courtroom that he had no respect for his mother's authority and no concern about the consequences he might face. Judge Judy's first direct address to Tyler came with deceptive calmness that anyone familiar with her style recognized as a warning shot across the bow. "Young man, put the phone away now." Tyler's response was to let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind of sound a teenager makes when asked to do basic chores, before slowly and deliberately sliding the phone into his pocket with movements that communicated maximum disrespect through minimum compliance. He removed one AirPod but left the other one dangling around his neck, a small act of defiance that suggested he would follow the letter of instructions but not the spirit. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, the first visible sign that she had catalogued this disrespect and added it to the growing list of corrections this child desperately needed. Jennifer Mason launched into her defense with the desperation of someone who knew she was fighting a losing battle but had to try anyway. "Your Honor, Tyler is fundamentally a good kid who made a terrible mistake. Mrs. Rodriguez is understandably upset, but I think she's exaggerating the value of these roses. They're plants. We can replace them." Tyler didn't understand how much they meant to her. He's only 12 years old. He doesn't fully grasp consequences yet. He thought it was just a harmless prank for his social media. Kids today live in a different world with different values. I've already disciplined him at home. We've had long conversations about respect and property. I really think we can settle this reasonably without involving such a large financial judgment. Every word that came out of Jennifer's mouth made the situation worse, each excuse reinforcing that this mother had spent years enabling her son's behavior, teaching him that consequences were negotiable and that being young exempted him from accountability. Judge Judy's response to Jennifer was swift and surgical. "Ma'am, at 12 years old, children absolutely understand right from wrong. They understand that destroying someone's property is wrong. They understand that causing pain to others is wrong. Your son didn't just understand what he was doing. He filmed it. He posted it publicly. He laughed about making an elderly woman cry. This wasn't a prank. This was cruelty for entertainment. Then Judge Judy turned her full attention to Tyler, her voice carrying the weight of 35 years of judicial authority. Young man, look at me when I'm speaking to you. Tyler finally dragged his eyes away from his lap where his hand had unconsciously drifted back toward his phone. He looked at Judge Judy with an expression that mixed boredom with mild annoyance, as if this entire proceeding was an inconvenient interruption to his day. Judge Judy asked the question that would trigger the moment that silenced the room and changed everything. Do you understand that what you did was wrong? Tyler's response came with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never faced real consequences and genuinely believed he never would. I mean, like, it's literally just flowers. She can buy more. It's not that deep. The audience gasped collectively. Jennifer closed her eyes as if she could somehow make this moment disappear through force of will. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter reached over to squeeze her mother's hand as tears formed in the elderly woman's eyes. Judge Judy's expression hardened into something that made the bailiff instinctively straighten his posture. Not that deep, she repeated, her voice dropping into that dangerously quiet register. You destroyed something irreplaceable and you think it's not that deep. Tyler, emboldened by 12 years of getting away with everything, actually shrugged and delivered the line that would seal his fate. Whatever, boomers are so dramatic about everything. The courtroom entered a state of suspended reality where time seemed to stop completely. Judge Judy slowly rose from her chair, an action she reserved for moments when proceedings transcended normal judicial boundaries and entered territory that demanded physical emphasis. Her movement was deliberate and controlled, each second stretching into eternity as everyone in the courtroom recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Her voice when she finally spoke was deadly calm, the kind of calm that precedes complete annihilation. Excuse me, what did you just say? Tyler, completely misreading the situation with the confidence of someone who had bullied his way through every authority figure in his life, actually doubled down on his disrespect. I said boomers are dramatic. Like, you're all the same, getting mad over nothing. It's giving Karen energy, honestly. He actually smirked at the camera as he said it, believing he had just delivered a devastating insult that his TikTok followers would celebrate when this episode aired. Judge Judy's response began with a statement that would be quoted in parenting articles and therapy sessions for years to come. Young man, let me tell you what I understand. I understand that you are 12 years old and already on a path to becoming someone nobody will want to be around. I understand that your mother has failed you by never teaching you that actions have consequences. I understand that you think your social media followers make you important, but they don't. They're watching you fail, and they'll move on to the next person in a heartbeat. She paused, letting each word sink in before continuing with increasing intensity. What you don't understand is that you are not special. You are not unique. You are a child who has been allowed to behave like a tyrant, and that ends today in my courtroom. You destroyed something precious because you thought it was funny. You mocked an elderly woman who has done nothing to you except exist near your property. You showed no remorse, no empathy, and no respect whatsoever. Tyler's smirk had completely vanished now, replaced by the first genuine fear he had probably felt in years. His face had gone pale as Judge Judy continued her systematic dismantling of his entire worldview. She revealed the evidence her research team had uncovered, the 3 previous incidents with neighbors that his mother had paid to make disappear, the $6,700 spent covering up his behavior, the school records showing escalating problems, the psychological evaluations recommending intervention that Jennifer had ignored. Every revelation hit Jennifer like a physical blow as she realized Judge Judy knew everything, had investigated everything, and was about to deliver consequences that couldn't be negotiated away with money or excuses. Tyler sat frozen as Judge Judy explained in devastating detail exactly what those 40-year-old roses meant, how Eduardo Rodriguez had planted them while battling cancer, how some were cuttings from Mrs. Rodriguez's childhood home in Mexico that represented her entire family history, how their market value of $2,400 was a fraction of their actual irreplaceable worth. Then came the ruling that would change Tyler's life forever. Judge Judy awarded Mrs. Rodriguez the full $3,200 she had requested, the maximum amount allowed in small claims court. But she didn't stop there. She imposed conditions that made Tyler's face crumble completely. He would personally restore Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, working 40 hours over 10 consecutive Saturdays under supervision of a court-appointed mediator. No phone would be allowed during this community service. He would write a formal handwritten apology letter with no digital assistance. His TikTok account would be permanently deleted with all videos featuring Mrs. Rodriguez removed immediately. He would be barred from all social media for 6 months with court monitoring to ensure compliance. Jennifer would enforce these restrictions or face contempt of court charges herself. The punishment was perfectly calibrated to hit Tyler exactly where it hurt most, stripping away the social media validation that had become his entire identity and forcing him into direct accountability with the woman he had victimized. Tyler's reaction was immediate and visceral. Tears streamed down his face as he cried out that this wasn't fair, that Judge Judy couldn't take away his account, that he had followers who cared about him. The irony was devastating. This was the first real emotion he had shown during the entire proceeding, and it was about losing his TikTok account rather than hurting another human being. Jennifer broke down completely, sobbing that she just wanted her son to like her, that she didn't know how to be the bad guy, that she had tried her best. Judge Judy's response was delivered with slightly less harshness but no less truth. He doesn't need a friend. He needs a parent. You've been enabling this behavior and now it stops today. When Tyler tried to protest one final time, shouting that Judge Judy was old and didn't understand, she delivered her final statement with absolute authority. Sit down and be quiet. You're going to learn that the real world doesn't care about your followers, doesn't care about your excuses, and certainly doesn't care about your attitude. You're going to spend 40 hours rebuilding what you destroyed, and maybe you'll learn that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn by showing it to others first. Case dismissed. Get out of my courtroom. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. 5 full seconds of complete quiet before the audience erupted in a standing ovation. Tyler was escorted out by his mother, hunched over in genuine shame for perhaps the first time in his life. The clip went viral within hours, reaching 80 million views and becoming the most watched Judge Judy moment in history. But the real story was what happened after, during those 10 Saturdays in Mrs. Rodriguez's garden where Tyler slowly transformed from entitled brat into a young man who finally understood that actions have consequences, that people have value beyond their social media presence, and that sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is force you to face the truth about yourself. By the final Saturday, Tyler was asking Mrs. Rodriguez to teach him Spanish while she taught him about roses, and an unlikely friendship formed between a 12-year-old who needed to learn empathy and a 72-year-old woman who still believed that broken children could be fixed with patience, boundaries, and love.